Like, raise your hand if you suppress your emotions sometimes. And here goes the number one thing you might want to start writing down is when emotions don't get processed. When emotions don't get processed, they get stored. Sleep it off or push through it. Sleep it off for 10,000. Emotions are not danger signals, they're data signals. And I'm always preaching the gospel of data, the gospel of Jesus Christ, and also the gospel of data. Welcome back to another episode of the Hill to Lead podcast, a space where we're coming to unlearn surviving life and embracing wholeness. It's not about perfection. It's about presence. I am your host, Kevin Overton-Hadnot. Again, you can find this podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio. That just means don't forget to share, like, and subscribe. Let's just jump in. So I've been on a bit of a high today, honestly. I came into the set just singing, frolicking in my hallway, if you will. But I've been on a high. I think just watching a particular reel on Instagram. It was a reel where on the Steve Harvey show, there was a guy who had gotten laid off from his job and obviously was distraught, was upset, not really showing a lot of signs of emotion, but I think as he talked and as Steve Harvey was talking to him, you can see he was overcome with a lot of emotion. And what was so impactful is the great Steve Harvey that he is. He talked to him. He spoke life into him. He really was asking him, don't think about the layoff as a setback or a failure. Think about it as like a God sighting, as God showing up and giving him a sign to now be able to do something great, to now challenge himself to think differently. And Steve Harvey had asked him, so now that you laid off, okay, cool. What is it that you really want to do? What is your passion? And his passion actually was cooking and becoming a chef. And it's interesting because his job that he got laid off from was some type of engineer, some type of like business 9 to 5. And taking the leap of faith required him to step out and maybe go to culinary school or to just begin cooking, maybe get a food truck. And so as the show progressed, literally on set on the show, I don't even know if it was live or if it was televised. Obviously, I know it made it to social media, which could possibly mean it was done, between segments or between episodes or segments. But Steve Harvey had called his foundation president and was like, hey, what can we do for this guy? And not only did Steve Harvey speak life into him, but he blessed him. And I've been on high all day because of that clip and just really seeing Steve Harvey bless him. He was obviously, overcome with joy and appreciation and gratitude and was grateful. But, the one thing that stuck with me from that is, do not give into fear. Do not give into fear. Fear is the thing that always leads to failure, right? And so that's just my message for today and just kind of how I'm starting off. Nothing to do with the episode, nothing to do with my content today, but I'm just on high just being able to see that particular reel on Instagram. But God works all things together for our good. God works all things together for our good. And so I just want to leave that with you, or start with that, honestly. But definitely let go of fear. All right. That's, again, nothing to do with my episode. I just wanted to open up with that because today we actually are, which is kind of a good segue, honestly. And good job, Kevin, for this unplanned transition. But the real thing I want to talk about is the cost of emotional suppression. Right. So it kind of plays a little bit of a role in just seeing maybe, him break down and cry and just with gratitude, just all the things that I was able to witness. So it kind of leads into this. So from my talk today, I will talk a little bit about, some of our somatic symptoms that we experience. I'm going to talk a little bit about burnout. And I was joking with myself as I was, writing this episode. I kind of always dabble in the burnout conversation. And I don't know, but maybe that's just because as I was writing it out and laughing at myself, it's really just me reflecting on me experiencing the season of burnout, particularly when I was doing a lot of church work, but more when I was doing wearing too many hats, just overworking myself, not remembering, my true bandwidth, not remembering my true humanness. And so just trying to be a Superman to everybody. So burnout was obviously always going to be high on my radar. And then questions that's kind of leading my thoughts in this conversation today is what happens when leaders numb emotions? What happens when leaders numb emotions? And how can emotional fluency, how can that strengthen families, communities, and maybe even teams if you're a leader? So this podcast, as I'm honing this a little bit more, right? It's really for men or for those of us who are leading businesses, or families, teams, ministries, even communities. This is for people who are in those realms, but for anybody really. But I'm thinking that this is for those people who really recognize that leadership is not just about strategy. I listen. There's leadership schools. I have an MBA, and I understand that we have to be coming up with the best processes. We have to build the best teams. We have to know our strengths and our weaknesses. Know your all of your qualities and characteristics. But for me, it's about self awareness. For me, it's about emotional capacity. And the thing that I've been talking about for the past couple of episodes, slightly as well, it's about nervous system regulation. Those are things for me, are helpful that we have to recognize beyond just strategy and effective processes and being efficient and return on investment. I think the true return on investment could be found when we think about our own self awareness, emotional capacity, and nervous system regulation. Again, I don't shy away from this part of the conversation. Many of us men, including myself, right? We're not taught how to. We were only taught how to perform, how to provide, how to protect, but really less on the processing of our emotions. And here goes the number one thing you might want to start writing down is when emotions don't get processed. When emotions don't get processed, they get stored. When emotions don't get processed, they get stored. They get stored in our body. The body keeps the score. They get stored in our behavior, and they also get stored in our leadership, right? Or maybe even in our masculinity. So today, of course, as you can see, we're talking about the cost of emotional suppression. And from my experience, I I want to explore with this, as I mentioned, as I started, just our somatic symptoms, our body symptoms that we experience, burnout and emotional numbing, which is going to be a topic that often gets just swept under the rug. But of course, I am the hope dealer. And as a hope dealer, I want to bring at least some type of hope at the beginning or the end of the message. And just the message here is emotions are not dangerous signals, they're data signals. Emotions are not danger signals, they're data signals. And I'm always, 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 always preaching the gospel of data, the gospel of Jesus Christ, and also the gospel of data, because I like to be data informed. What leader, what male should not be data informed or data driven, right? As we make decisions, as we lead, as we just be. I want to use data, and that data also comes from our emotions and our body as well. So emotions are not dangerous signals. We don't have to shy away from them. We don't have to hide from them. We don't have to be nervous or scared about them. You are human. You're going to have emotions, men and women. So just think about them as data signals. And when we learn to interpret our emotional data, we as leaders, as men, we become clear, we become calmer, right? We become more effective. So that's just my opening spiel. I want to just pause for my own self. I want to do an icebreaker. I always jump right in, but just because I kind of just think about my own self, I always want to find ways to get to know, for people to get to know me as well, just as your podcast host. So a little bit of rapid fire, this or that. I usually like playing this with other people, but we're solo today. No dog, nothing else, just me. But all right, so this or that, Kevin. The first one is talking it out or thinking it through alone. Talking it out or thinking it through alone. I think just to give myself some grace, I probably do a little bit of both. As probably all of these are going to be a little bit of both, but I think I love talking it out. I'm someone who is big on externalizing. When I think it through alone, it gives me some clarity and some perspective. But I'm also like, at least I like saying it out loud. So if it's talking with other people, or just talking it out loud, I like that exercise, and I love just kind of expressing it, and just maybe sometimes saying it. One allows me to see how it lands with myself, maybe even other people. I don't need the validation from other people, but obviously it helps. So talking it out is probably what I would say. And the next one is gym walk or gym workout or quiet walk. And in this season of my life, I love a quiet walk. I love a quiet walk. One is just exercise, but two, it's kind of refreshing. I think someone who appreciates going to the gym, I just really value walking. I'll leave it at that. Journaling or venting to a friend. Well, this is a quick little secret of being a twin. You kind of always have someone to talk to, no matter what. And good, bad, or ugly. In relationships, I do as well. With best friends, I do as well. But I think for me, I really have found appreciation of being able to vent to someone else. Now, I'm not going to them as my therapist. Shout out to my main therapist or my therapist, but appreciate my brothers who are able to like just listen, and I'll call them and say, hey, what's going on? Hey, do you have a second? And then I'll just kind of vent. So I love that. And again, there's nothing to fix, there's nothing to do or to work on. It's just me sharing my thoughts. Silence or music when I'm stressed. I love music. I love music, so I got to go with music. If you know me, I'm probably always humming around the house or singing. But I'm always listening to worship music because that's probably the most thing that's calming for me. And I think not only is it calming, it points me back to God. I'm a strong believer in God, and that music is very pointing. It points me back to who I need to lean on, and in those moments, that's when I do feel like my stress is lessening. The next one is deep breathing or distraction. I'm gonna go with deep breathing. The next one is problem solving or emotional processing. I know I'm a therapist, but I'm gonna have to go with problem solving for 100 on this one. Sleep it off or push through it. Sleep it off for 10,000. Or asking for help or figuring out yourself. I'm a little bit of both, and I get to say that when this is my show. I love asking for help, especially if it's something that is a low hanging fruit and it doesn't cost anyone too much. And not being funny, I feel like I put out enough, love in the atmosphere, and I'm hoping that God can return some of that support. But I don't mind asking for help, depending on what it is, especially if yeah. Again, I'm a twin, so I'm used to like having double, if you will. But also, I mean, I can figure it out too sometimes if I really really need to. And then last one is taking a break or working harder. Y'all know me. I'm definitely going to be taking a break. But all right, I went through that, and really why it mattered as I was even reflecting, even doing that exercise is like there really are no right or wrong answers, and I hope as you went through them with me, if you're listening, if you're driving, if you're watching, there really are no right or wrong answers. They really just really reveal how you yourself are able to regulate and manage your nervous system. But I will say, as many men as we do, sometimes we kind of default to logic, to action, and to problem solving. I think that works, well in many leadership situations and many situations when you're called upon. But I will hint at this idea that it can become dangerous whenever it turns into emotional suppression. So I think that is the hope or the challenge or the tension of that particular exercise, or excuse me, of some of the nuance of that exercise behind that. All right, so let's dive in. Why many men learn to suppress emotions? Like, raise your hand if you suppress your emotions sometimes. Like, I'll definitely raise my hand, especially before I became a therapist. So I'm not perfect, and I became a therapist like into my 30s. So just know that I sit with many of us who are continuing to practice that particular habit. But if we start with the root issue behind suppressing our emotion, I mentioned this on probably previous episodes too. Like we really didn't choose. We don't really choose to suppress our emotions. I think we were trained into that. And so again, I'm giving us so much grace here as men. Many of us grew up hearing messages like, you have to man up, you have to, don't cry, or I give you more to cry about. You handle it, like a man. Or the best one that I always hear is be strong. I took a sip there because I reminded myself on. I'm thinking of someone that I worked with before that in the first 5 or 10 minutes of me working with them, I had just met them. This was our first conversation, and the first 10 minutes of me talking and working with them, they had mentioned that they have to be strong or something about strong at least 15 times in that 10-minute time frame. Now, I'm not exaggerating. I'm not making this up. I think for me, that just reminded me that we were trained into this mantra of being strong in this way of being. And I think what these messages unintentionally taught us is that emotion equals weakness. And listen, I'm not judging. I'm just again loving to give us food for thought that we were trained into this idea that emotions equal weakness. So I think boys, and because I'm talking on not on behalf of men but to men, we learn to do three things. We learn to hide our emotion really, really well, to mask it, right? To mask our pain. Or we've learned to intellectualize our emotion. What does that mean? Intellectualizing emotions is really more of a defense mechanism that serve really as a shield against the overwhelming intensity of the feelings, right? It's a process of us suppressing our emotions. We do this probably by overthinking. We do this by overanalyzing or analyzing and really trying to explain them away. It can be rooted in our upbringing, maybe even in societal expectations of us as men, which is very true, or just what we've developed as habits, as coping strategies over some time. So we learn to do, that intellectualizing our emotions. We've also learned as boys to convert our emotions into action, right? So just always doing and not sitting down. But from my experience, I would say this is really emotional suppression. And again, the suppression, it doesn't mean that the emotion goes away. It doesn't mean that it disappears. It does mean that emotions get pushed down or pushed out of our conscious awareness. But the challenge is, and the reason why I've been thinking about this over these past couple of weeks is that emotion is still living in our body. The body still carries it. And this is where we begin to talk more about like our somatic experiences and somatic symptoms. And that's where this comes in. And so somatic symptoms are when emotional stress shows up physically. What are some examples? Maybe chronic headache, maybe jaw clenching, maybe digestive problems, maybe tight shoulders, or you have pain around your neck, maybe sleep problems, high blood pressure. That's why they always say check your numbers. Also, fatigue. And I wanted to say more about fatigue really quickly. Fatigue for me is a term that we use to describe an overall feeling of tired or a lack of energy. Like it isn't the same as really feeling like drowsy or sleepy. Like when we're fatigued, like we have no motivation, we have no energy. And so being sleepy may be a form or a symptom of fatigue, but they're not the same thing. And so again, that's just one example of how emotional stress shows up physically. And then another one is irritability. which is just something to begin putting in your back pocket as food for thought, but maybe eventually as data for you over time. And irritability is really just this tendency to react to stimuli in our environments with negative emotions. So it might be us, reacting in anger, or responding in frustration or agitation, but it's often in response to these small triggers that would normally provoke such reactions, or normally would not provoke such reactions. It can manifest as a short temper, as grumpiness, or just in a general sense of being on edge. So I think that while many people, experience irritability occasionally, this more persistent irritability indicates maybe there's an underlying mental health condition or concern or something to be worried about, or in my words, just data for us to be thinking about. The reason why I'm raising this here, and talking about somatic symptoms, are when we allow, or when our emotional stress shows up physically, and gave you some examples, is because the body actually or eventually becomes a storage unit for unprocessed emotion. The body becomes a storage unit for unprocessed emotions. And eventually, the body starts sending signals. Now, sometimes we, overlook them, we avoid them, or we just say, "Oh no, that wasn't a signal." And again, this isn't the body punishing us, or it's not us being punished, but really, again, this is the data that we should be picking up on. Those signals are something inside of us saying that this needs attention. So hopefully that resonated with you, and you took something from just this opening idea conversation around, why many men learn to suppress our emotion. Again, not to judge, definitely to empathize with you, and to encourage you to think about this in a different way going forward. So I want to talk about emotional numbing, but before I talk about emotional numbing, I wanted to just give the difference between, or juxtapose, emotional suppression with emotional numbing. Emotional suppression is or suppression rather, is the conscious or semi-conscious act of pushing emotions down. Like, you feel the emotion, but you deliberately try to control, hide, or ignore it, which again, that happens far too often. Psychologically, suppression is a regulation strategy where we might say, you know what, I can't deal with this feeling right now. But what happens is, or what it looks like is, maybe we're forcing ourselves maybe not to cry. We are ignoring anger in a meeting. We are saying, you know what, I'm fine. But really deep down inside, you're actually hurt if you really take a moment to think about it. Or it looks like maybe just us pushing sadness aside, and we're just going to keep working through it. Now, sometimes you may do that as a means to get through the day, but I think over time, and that causing, like, creating a pattern, it's something to think about. Maybe an example for men is, maybe a leader receives criticism from our boss. We may feel embarrassed or angry, but instead of really being human, we tell ourselves, you know what, don't react, just move on. But the reality is, the emotion is still there. It's just pushed down temporarily. And a note I would add here is a little bit of research is, when we suppress more, then that increases our stress hormones, that increases our emotional pressure, and even some psychological tension, which I think that's why, suppression, or when we suppress our emotions, they often resurface later on as something else, maybe again as burnout, or even as irritability. So that's emotional suppression. On the opposite side of that is emotional numbing, and numbing is when the emotional system shuts down, and the person stops feeling much at all. Instead of, like, pushing our emotions away, which is more suppression, the nervous system really dampens our emotional experience entirely. And it often is a protective response after maybe prolonged stress, maybe after trauma, or even emotional overload. And what that could look like, emotional numbing, it could look like, feeling emotionally flat. It can look like, you know what, I just don't care anymore. It can also look like just a lack of pure excitement and joy. Maybe it looks like detachments from relationships, and also just a difficulty in identifying our feelings. And men, maybe it is, a man who has been under extreme pressure at work. I don't know why I'm keep going back to work examples, but that may be a sign for something for someone. But a man who has been under extreme work pressure for months says, nothing really bothers me anymore, but nothing really excites me either. Again, he's not really pushing the emotions away. He's just not really feeling them strongly in the first place. So I would just say here, numbing is typically associated with burnout, maybe a trauma response, depression, or just our nervous system shutting down. And so I'm just, again, I was going to give this disclaimer, just food for thought, data for you to take in, not to judge yourself about. A simple reminder is, suppression is you feel it, I just push it down. And numbing is you stop feeling much at all. From my lens, or from, like, a leadership lens, or men leading, or leadership driven masculinity, which I'll talk about either in this episode or another one. But for many men in leadership roles, like, the pattern often looks like, we suppress our emotions repeatedly. Our stress accumulates over time. Our nervous system, overload occurs, and then emotional numbing develops. So it's more like this little suppression numbing loop that can sometimes take shape if we don't pay attention to it. And I think this is why, some of our even high performer leaders, I talked about that at a show I did recently, and we feel disconnected, or they feel, I'm just going to go through the motions, or not even feel much at all. So I would beg to say it's not really a personality change. It's really just often like chronic suppression, and that leads to what becomes emotionally shutting down. But there is a healthy alternative that I wanted to just mention briefly: emotional processing. And the goal is not to, like, express every single emotion. I'm not saying go around and exude every single, or embody every single emotion, but how do we begin to think about one emotions differently, but also to process them intentionally? Healthy emotional processing. Maybe this is just naming what you're feeling. Let's start there. I think of this idea of naming as attainment, and, like, what if we just start with naming what you're feeling? Maybe the next thing is just understanding, why it showed up, perhaps, and then really deciding how you respond wisely. And I think for me, that begins to build what I'm going to think about, not necessarily coin, but just talk more about emotional fluency. And that actually strengthens leadership, and then male leadership, if you will, overall. So, all right. So, what happens when leaders numb emotions? Um, you know, a couple of things. Emotional numbing, I think there's maybe four or five of these, and then I'm wrapping up. Emotional numbing reduces empathy, right? So if a leader disconnects from their own emotions, they also struggle to recognize emotions in others, right? And this can also make leaders appear maybe cold, make you feel dismissive, or even unapproachable. Can we even approach you? Right? And I think even if that wasn't their intention, that's what happens. But emotional awareness is really a core leadership skill that we should be thinking about and reflecting on, and really just a skill that we all should have, or strive for as humans. Again, um, teams and maybe everyone in our universe really function better when people feel seen and understood. So I think emotional numbing reduces our empathy. And I think a way to think about that is just reflect on, am I being cold? Am I being dismissive? Can I be approached? Or am I approachable? And just begin to reflect on that. Again, just give yourself data points. And I'll say it again, the gift of reflection. What happens when leaders numb emotion? The second thing is suppression increases burnout. So suppression, it just takes so much more energy. to suppress our emotions, a lot of energy, and we're constantly using mental effort to push feelings down. And over time, this leads to not only, emotional exhaustion, it leads to mental fatigue, irritability, and potentially like a loss of motivation. Many men, and being a jump in the comments if you agree or disagree. Many men describe burnout as a feeling like I just don't care anymore. And that's oftentimes what we hear when it's attached to this. But what's happening really just emotional shutting down. And then the third thing is suppression leaks out as reactivity. Emotion that isn't processed will eventually come out sideways. I'll say that again. Emotion that isn't processed will eventually come out sideways. Some examples are we're snapping at people, family members, loved ones, friends, employees, ministry members, you name it. Maybe short temper with people, impatience with mistakes, or even overreacting to small problems. And I'm never one to like categorize or label problems, but for this conversation, just overreacting to small problems, this is kind of maybe suppression leaking out, right, through activity. You might think, why am I so angry lately? But again, the anger isn't often the anger isn't excuse me the anger is often unprocessed emotion finally finding an exit, and I'll leave it at that. But one thing you might remember with this conversation is suppressed emotions don't disappear, they just accumulate and snowball over time. All right, I mentioned a second ago emotional fluency. And I believe this is the superpower. This is the biggest flex. This is the real courage that it takes to and the skill to grow this. And so I want to shift this more to the hopeful side. Again, emotional awareness is not weakness. It's actually like an advanced leadership, capacity. And I think about it more as this emotional fluency, but just like learning a new language. Emotional fluency means that you're able to recognize emotions, you're able to name the emotions, you're able to interpret what they mean, and you're able to respond intentionally. All four of those are necessary and needed in this emotional fluency, or being emotional fluent. Emotional or emotion becomes information, not something that we avoid. An example might be, stress might be telling you, I need support. Frustration might be telling you, a boundary needs to be set. Knock on this mic. A boundary needs to be set. Sadness might be telling you, what, something meaningful was actually lost. Emotion is simply, I would think about emotion as just internal feedback. I hope that's the number one walk or tool that you're walking away with. Emotion is simply internal feedback. And when we as men can interpret that feedback, we become more thoughtful, we become more empathetic, we become more emotionally stable, especially emotionally stable under pressure. And that also affects everyone else around us. It ripples out. When we are regulated, our environments become, we create regulated environments rather. People feel safer, communication improves. Women, if you're listening, you want to get this going. Communication improves, conflict becomes more productive instead of destructive. Emotional fluency doesn't really mean, being emotional all the time. So I want to demyth that. But it really just means that we really are becoming more aware enough to really choose how we're going to respond. So again, all that's really the cost of emotional suppression. And to begin wrapping up, I want to go to the segment I call "Letter from the Listeners." And every episode, we may read a letter from you. It's a reader or a listener who is going through life and mental health and everything in between. And this letter comes from who this comes from. Okay, Luke. Luke is a 34-year-old father of two, and he says, I think I might need help with my mental health. I've been feeling overwhelmed and irritable for months. I don't feel like myself, but I don't know where to start. Therapy feels intimidating, and I worry about being judged. How do you even begin finding help? Well, first, I just want to, say, something important to you, which is, if you're feeling this way, you are not broken. You're not broken. You're likely overloaded. And many of us, right? Many of us often reach the point where the pressure of maybe work, of responsibility, of leading a family, of leading communities, leading the things that we're leading, and just ultimately emotional suppression that starts to catch up with us. And seeking help is not a failure. Who is this for? That's for all of us watching and listening. Seeking help is not a failure. I think it's actually a sign of self awareness. It's actually a sign of courage. It takes courage to ask, someone for help, to reach beyond yourself. Staying in your own person, in your own mental cage, that's comfortable, that's convenient. It takes courage to go beyond that. So if you're wondering where to start, maybe a couple of thoughts that I noted before this episode is, look for a maybe a professional licensed counselor if you're comfortable, or even a psychologist if you need some additional support. But someone who works professionally in this realm, I'm going to be a big advocate for this. If maybe the first one did not work, dust yourself off and maybe try one more time. I just think that maybe there's someone else who may be a better fit if the first person did not work out. But you don't have to have everything figured out before you go to therapy. That's also a misnomer that I want to talk about in maybe an ebook or something. But that's not a prerequisite. It's not a requirement. Therapy for me is not about having the perfect explanation, but really just having a place to start your own conversation. You definitely, I'm going to say out loud, it is okay to talk to a trusted friend, maybe a mentor. I have a mentor still, and I'm in my 30s. Maybe a pastor or a spiritual leader, or even if there's local men's support groups, that can be helpful as well. For me, I think the encouragement is isolation amplifies our emotional stress. So, what can reduce it is probably connection. Again, isolation amplifies our emotional stress, and connection is what reduces it. So, if you didn't hear anything else, just remember strong men ask for help when the load gets heavy, and that's not wisdom. I mean, that's not weakness, that is wisdom. So I'll leave us with this episode. If this resonated with you, definitely feel free to write us at healtolead@gmail.com. And we may read a letter from you on our show. I hope the one that we read today resonated with you. And if you think someone else may need to hear this, feel free to email them or send this to them as well. Send them the link to this YouTube or on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Just as I'm leaving, as a hope dealer, I got to keep leaving our hope information, some hope nuggets, if you will. So the hopeful truth from today is emotions are not danger, they are data. And when you learn to listen to that data, if we learn to listen to what's happening, we learn to pause and reflect, we become healthier as men and stronger as leaders as well. So hope this is a great episode for you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Send this to somebody so that you don't have to heal alone. I love you. Peace out.